Hello, everybody.
Greetings.
This is episode 160 of Transmission, and this is January 27th, 2021.
And the question is, what district do you live in?
I don't even remember how the districts work. All I know
Me
about
neither.
from those books and movies is they don't give that President Snow enough credit because he's trying to make America great again.
He is.
Yeah.
He is. Absolutely.
Uh,
All right. So I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct Micah, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
I'm Mark Van Stunick. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination. Remember when we used to watch apocalyptic stuff for fun?
Yeah, I was saying beforehand to Mark that a friend of mine the other day created this little meme that said, the dystopian present is interfering with my ability to enjoy my dystopian future movies. It's like, it's true, right? So,
it's kind of like it's a twisted version of, if you watch films from the 80s that are set in the early 2000s and they show flying cars and stuff, and you're like, they didn't know. Like that's always a fun game. This is like the demented, not fun version of that game of like,
right.
Yep. That's not how dystopia works. This is how it works.
This is how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've been distracted from the pandemic by our fascist takeover. So we've mostly been talking about that for the last while. Mm-hmm. But the vaccines are rolling out, and so it's time to talk about the Hunger Games version of vaccination land. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty wild what's going on with rolling this out. I mean, what's amazing to me about this is that at every single step along the way, America has screwed up the response to the pandemic, like at every single step. I mean, it's kind of like clockwork. It's the amazing predictability of this. So the vaccines are rolling out. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Got these vaccines super fast, and out they come. And so we're trying to get people vaccinated, and it's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy what's going on. And there really is this sort of image of all these people like hoarding to the gates, trying to climb over and clamber over. And so the stories that are happening are just crazy. So just a few to whet our appetite. So some of you may have seen about the Canadian billionaires, this couple. They heard that, one of the places where the vaccine was rolling out was this remote native village. And so they flew up there. I guess they hid their plane in a bush or something. I don't know. I don't know that part of the story, but
through some sort of like leafy tarp over it.
Yeah, right, yeah. Exactly. That camouflage thing that you see in the movies, where they like hide the plane quick. And dressed up as workers, as poor workers, so they could get vaccinated. So that happened. A friend of mine the other day was cross-country skiing, and he talked about how this group of young guys that he was sort of leapfrogging with on the trail were talking about all the ways that they were going to scam the system to get vaccinated, using all their connections. And then myself, who technically I'm in the 1A group because I'm a pastor and a psychotherapist, and I do healthcare work, and have had to do that virtually because of this. But I'm independent, so I don't work for a large system. And so I've been calling around, and it's just hilarious, the people that I talk to. So I talked to county public health department this morning. They said, well, you would be eligible, and you should be able to get into our vaccine clinic, except somebody leaked the link for the appointments, and we've just been flooded with all these random people who are just wanting to get vaccinated, so we have no appointments for you. So we'll put you on a list, and we'll be in touch. So this is what's going on out there.
And this is a fascinating example of how systems work, because the first instinct that I've heard is the number of things. One is to blame all these individuals for leapfrogging, for being selfish bastards, and that if everyone were kind and altruistic, then our system would be fine, as though that somehow our system itself doesn't encourage this shit behavior. Like, again, it's the chicken or the egg. It's kind of like with recycling or everything, as though somehow like it's the individuals in the system who are responsible for making the system great, right? And that's not how it works. Then the other piece is like, so Biden hasn't been in office long, so none of this is really his fault exactly. But if you start pushing this and start putting pressure on him, I've already seen people saying things like, you need to give him space. You need to it's not his fault. He needs sympathy. Like, no, he's the power person with the levers. I don't care how he feels. We should pressure him, whether it's his fault or not. This idea of boiling everything down to individual sort of motives and sympathies really breaks down when you try to apply that logic to systems. And so right now, it's the toilet paper thing all over again. Like, yes, those people are assholes. But we should be in a system that doesn't encourage people to be assholes.
No. Well, and it's the same thing though with Biden. I mean, he is an individual in a role in this giant system, and the healthcare systems in our country are these broken, independent, disconnected, competitive systems. Everyone's out for themselves. Every health department is different, right? There's no unified standard of what a county or state health department is. The health departments in Minnesota are totally different from the ones in North Dakota or South Dakota. There's some states where county health departments don't exist. And so you have this completely atomized random system trying to do a national scale thing, and
somehow make profit out of it.
Right, and somehow make money at the same time. But as Mark said before we started, the alternative would be an evil socialist system.
Yeah, so, where all of a sudden everyone gets cared for, but then like maybe your billionaire here and there can't jump the line. Here's the thing: in a socialist system, billionaires still find a way to jump the line.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about them. You don't have to worry about them. They can always fly to some other country to do whatever the hell they want. That's what happens.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, and then it creates this burden. Like, so then you get these people flooding the system, and the system is not like, we knew this early on. The system is not designed to care for people. It's designed to maximize profit, and so everything got swamped. So then all of a sudden, other things, like if you just had a regular old health emergency, you couldn't get in because things were overloaded. And so we're seeing that happen now.
Still can't. Yeah.
Seeing that happen now, like all the time. Some comments coming in. Mark writes, worth noting, every person in the USA is jumping the line compared with poorer nations. What is happening in the US is analogous to the ways in which the US government works on the world stage. Yeah, and so there's also this other bigger piece of like which countries are able to buy up. Again, the vaccine creators are also private companies trying to make profit. They might have a motive to be somewhat altruistic for their public relations stuff, but it's still wealthy nations are buying stuff up. I guarantee Uganda doesn't have as much access to the vaccines as the United States does.
Yeah. Yeah, and then even, within countries, right? So I just read something yesterday that the UK, which, now Brexited the EU, so the UK and the EU are now fighting over vaccine access. I mean, it really is. It's like the Hunger Games, man. And if you're in District 12, you're screwed. You really are.
Yep. Ellen writes, good morning. In Indiana, most teachers are in person and aren't on the eligibility list. See, and this is the other thing. Like, okay, so the government has its thing, and the federal government has its thing, and then it's like, but the states have a lot of power how they do it, and then at counties, there's these different judicatory systems that are all different and not integrated very well. And so you end up with vastly different approaches. Yeah. And it really taints how people perceive this, because like then, you see this all the time. Like it might be the county's fault, but then they want to blame the governor. And it might be the state's fault, but they want to blame the president. And it might be the federal government's fault, but they want to blame their mayor. Like people don't know who to blame because our system is so screwed up and not cohesive.
Well, and then all of these systems deprioritize the people who are the most vulnerable and who are the most frontline workers, right? So, for example, in big healthcare systems, the person in billing who has been working at home for 11 months, who never sees patients or has to come into work at all, right? They're getting vaccinated before teachers. Well, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, they should be last on the list unless they're old, which most of them aren't. But because they happen to work for this healthcare system, they're getting prioritized before. Yeah, we spoke to somebody who's in the school district, a teacher in a school district with 20,000 students. Last week, they got 43 doses of the vaccine. I was like, why 43? Yeah, and then you've got a racial element overlaid on it. So Philadelphia, for example, right now is a complete mess with all of this. They got sent all of these doses to the inner city. They completely ignored a number of inner city Black doctors and healthcare workers who were set up to do the vaccine. They tried to create this, I forget, some really stupid name, which I'm not going to remember, of these young white people who are supposed to go around and like teach people how to give vaccines. And this was the most racist thing imaginable. The system broke down, and so they weren't able to give out these vaccines in the inner city. So they've been shipping these doses to the suburbs where all these young white people have been getting vaccinated and have access. And again, many of these people are folks who are working at home and, they just want to be able to go out to eat. So.
Good times. Leah's writes, y'all think racist people in the Deep South are crazy? Canadian racists are nuts. And this is the other thing. Like, there's these stereotypes. It's so funny. Like when, I didn't, before the show, I was talking about this couple that you mentioned who was like trying to steal indigenous elder vaccines. I didn't remember they were Canadian. I thought it was Alaska, because even in my brain, it's like Canadians are nice. They wouldn't do that. Right. But it shows you, like, I mean, that's not.
Oh yeah.
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 Canada has all kinds of colonial problems.
Yep.
And we got to remember that. All kinds. They're not some sort of socialist utopia up there. They just have a national health system, which is nice to have. And we should have one too. Yes. Kathleen writes, Missouri is 50th of the states in giving up vaccines. Go figure. There's a lot of shit coming out of Missouri. I know a lot of wonderful Missourians, and it bugs me, like when good people have crappy governance, which is basically everyone. Everyone in the world pretty much is like that. But we are among the worst. CK writes, this just seems like the evolutionary slow road to fuck that America is on because of the gross malfeasance of governance.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've we've talked about this before in terms of, the rise and fall of empires and the natural life cycle of anything, including a system and an organization. It is that, yeah, I mean, our systems, which have been built on many problematic premises, yeah, are getting to the point where they're just not working. I mean, they're just not working. And what's interesting, right, about America is you think about how we have glorified this kind of individualist, empty frontier, the Wild West, right? I mean, think about, everybody alive today in America who's a white person for sure, and many other people, have been raised on Westerns, right? And oh, isn't it great? Let's go kill the savages, and America was this great open no man's land where you could just go out and with your gun, take over. And well, it's like that's the same attitude that these 40-something-year-old ski guys had of like, okay, let's just get the vaccine. We're going to storm the clinic. I mean, I just have this image. It's like street dealing. It's like, hey man, I can hook you up. Like, just come to the back door of the clinic. I'll give you a jab, tonight at 5. And there is a place in Pueblo, Colorado, where they've got this kind of outdoor vaccine clinic. And at the end of the day, people show up and they're like, hey, do you have any doses left over? And they're just then vaccinating random people because otherwise they'd be throwing out the vaccines. It's so crazy.
Responding to Mark Tibble's comment, conspiracy theorists try to spin this as a Democrat thing. I mean, it's funny. Like, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a robot bird thing. Yeah.
Also, but you're right. It's an America thing. I think, this is the other one. It shows so many different pieces to this. Like, one of the myths in our society is that capitalism is efficient and more able to pivot. And we're seeing that that's not true, because it's the most socialistic of governments. It doesn't have to be authoritarian. We equate those two. That's another myth in the United States. But like different, like New Zealand or something isn't more authoritarian than the United States, but they have a national system. A lot of places have national systems, and these nationalized systems are able to pivot quicker, generally speaking, than this sort of. We don't apply the logic of warlords. It's basically, we have health warlords everywhere that are competing for slices of the pie. There's no need for them to work together. They actually compete against one another, and that makes a really massive bureaucracy. Yeah. Patricia writes, my 76-year-old partner is in Hudson, Wisconsin, getting his vaccine as I type. It took a lot of online work for me to figure out how to make this happen. I have many clients and friends over 75, and very few figured out how to get scheduled. Now, just so for context, Patricia works within the system of like general care. Like, so this is like, if anybody's going to know how to navigate this as a regular person, it's going to be someone like Patricia. And for someone like Patricia to have to try so hard to figure it out, like, can you imagine people that can you imagine what your uncle who only types in all caps is doing right now? They have no way of figuring this shit out.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, all these old people are hunched over computers everywhere and at their phones, like redialing the same numbers and typing into the same websites, like trying to, and again, if you had a registered nationalized system, it would send you an email or give you a phone call and say, hey, you've got an appointment on such and such a day. Like, we could do that, right? I mean, that is the funny thing. We have these people that show up at your house every day and drop off mail. We have, Amazon and UPS and FedEx, and, we have all these things, but we're not employing them. Because all of those, the companies are all for-profit companies. The post office we're trying to destroy because it's not a for-profit company. And so we don't have any systems in this country really that are geared for prioritizing care for people. And I think until we keep saying that over and over again, because I think we try to pretend that that's not true. But until we keep saying that over and over again, it's going to be very hard to either shift the current systems or create new ones, because that has to be the bottom line, that caring for people is what's most important.
You socialist. You're such a pinko,
I know.
Dan.
I'm such a pinko. It's true.
Gus, right. Saw a thing comparing the U.S. to Rwanda, which has basically made all of the right decisions around COVID despite having much less resources to do so, and having had the added burden of having been in a trade war with the United States.
Right. Yeah, and one of the fascinating, totally bizarre twists to that is, and it's not just Rwanda. It's actually any of the countries in Africa that were affected by Ebola, and it was the United States CDC folks that taught all of these countries these public health measures during the Ebola crisis for how to deal with a pandemic and an out of control virus when you didn't have tons of money and lots of resources. So when COVID showed up, these countries just dusted off this playbook and there's like, we know how to do this. We've got people trained. We know how to do contact tracing. We know how to isolate people. We've done all this. And so, yeah, they've done way better than we have. We've, of course, ignored our own advice because, Donald Trump was smarter than everybody else. And yeah, and then they're looking at us going like, hey, what is going on over there? Like, you all taught us how to do all this stuff, but now you're not doing it. Oh, yeah.
So many reasons why. And and after 160 episodes, we've barely even scratched the surface of the stupidity that is our society. Speaking of which, Elias says Americana is sadly a farce. And also another recommendation, great book, and we're talking about the people's history of the United States of America. There's so much information that's just readily available sitting out. This isn't some sort of conspiracy theory to talk about how dysfunctional our society is, but these myths go deep. And still you have people like people in office that are driving this that still think they're being oppressed because they couldn't get a beer whenever they wanted at their favorite bar.
Right.
So many, CK writes, the old USSR bread lines are looking good right about now. Stand in line, get some bread, stand in line, get a vaccine.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Kathleen writes, I'm reading about the mob's hold on Kansas City in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They were quite efficient.
No.
And that's the thing is like organized crime is sometimes more effective than our disorganized crime that is our governance. Elias writes, government websites are notorious for crashing. I mean, that's the other thing. Like this, you look into the politics of who gets these contracts for web development, and it's almost always crappy. And somehow, like, somehow the government, like this, it's not making a decision really based upon the common good at all.
Yeah.
It's these weird
and within healthcare, I mean, this is just an amazing other little issue into all of this is technology and healthcare, right? And again, when we were getting ready for this, talking about the reality that if you look at the thousands of hours that clinicians spend on these crappy IT platforms doing paperwork, right? And it's thousands and thousands of hours, and it's usually extra unpaid hours, right? So they have to go home at night and do this on their computer. Deborah's constantly on the computer doing this charting shit. It's of no help to patient care, right? And what is it all about? It's all about billing, right? So it's all about the hospital having to get money by justifying all this quote care. And it's all on these horrible computer systems because the healthcare provider doesn't care if they're using a Windows 98 system from the 90s to do their stuff. And And if you got rid of all of that time, and those people could devote some time, one, either to just taking care of themselves, or two, to things like social work, connecting people to care, organizing sorts of things that needed to be done, that would be so much more helpful for people. Special projects like getting the vaccine organized. But no, they're just on this computer system, making money, having to justify their existence. And meanwhile, yeah, you've got, a 75-year-old trying to figure out how to find a website that barely even exists.
Yep. Tyler writes, the right likes to blame the government for all problems while simultaneously taking every measure to limit its ability to function appropriately in situations like we're in right now. It's the serpent eating its own tail. Everything is then left up to private enterprises whose goal is always like that should be double underlined, to maximize profit first and foremost, which usually ends up with widespread inequality and inefficiency. And every once in a while, you see a business undercutting its bottom line for altruistic purposes, but it's so rare that when that happens, it makes almost the international news.
Yeah.
Right? Remember that guy? He's still in the news. The guy who said, "You know what? I'm not going to make as much money. I'm going to have all of my workers make $60,000 a year more." That guy is still in the news because of that thing that happened 4 years ago. This is so rare.
And recently he was writing about this, and he said, the reaction to him and to this experiment. So again, just for those of you that haven't heard about this, a few years ago, this guy, he's got tech companies in the Pacific Northwest, and he said, I'm going to cap my salary at $70,000. And I'm going to, distribute that extra money. I could be making $1 million or whatever. And I'm going to distribute that to employees so that everybody's making at least 70 grand. And his company has done great, right? His company has done really well. So now it's several years later, and he just wrote the other day about, he said, the fact that basically nobody else has done this, proves that this really is not about prioritizing workers and having good companies. It really is about the people at the top just making as much money as possible. He said, because really, if companies and CEOs and boards of directors cared about their workers and about the health of their companies, at this point, tons of companies would be doing exactly what I did because it's working great. But nobody's doing it. And he's got a very good point there, which gets to exactly what Tyler is talking about. I mean, that this baked in system, he's this weird anomaly that everybody goes, oh yeah, well, that could be kind of cool, but we're not going to do this.
That's right. Where the F are you at, big tech? I mean, see, it's interesting what's happening right now. Like I just read, I think in yesterday's news cycle, maybe it was 2 days ago, there's like 5 people each paying like $25 million to be able to go to the space station. Like that's happening during this pandemic. And the puff piece articles are like, this is great. This is the frontier of discovery. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous. That they have so much wealth that like, let's go to space because it'd be neat. Is somehow like people say, well, I guess it's their money. They can do whatever they want with it because we have this understanding of how money works, who generates it. That's all based on these basic lies. And so money goes in these things that don't actually help anybody.
Right.
Besides those 4 or 5 guys who want to go to space for a vacation. Like, I hope there's the space. I hope they're not able to come back home. I'm just going to leave it at that. Kathleen writes, what do you think about those not choosing to advertise during the Super Bowl so that they can support charities instead? Am I being overly skeptical?
Well, I mean, I haven't heard about that, but I am sure that their marketing people said, "Hey, look, we can get as much publicity giving this money to charity as we can giving it to the NFL or whoever, CBS or whoever's broadcasting the Super Bowl. So, there still is a marketing spin on this. Is it better for them to give that money to some charities? Well, maybe in the short run. We've talked some over the months about the charity model of distributing wealth versus the justice model. So, many of these quote nonprofit charities, a lot of this money is going to people at the top who are making a ton of money. I mean, the CEO of United Way in Minneapolis makes $400,000 a year, which doesn't really strike me as a charity kind of posture. So yes, I think we should be skeptical of moves like this for sure.
And sometimes rich people with a lot of power feel bad and do nice things because they're still human beings and they still have power to do that. The system doesn't completely cut them off from doing that. So sometimes that happens, which is great when that happens, but that's not a justification even a little bit for the system. And we can't sit back and wait for rich people to have their Ebenezer Scrooge moments. So I think we should be glad, but still lament a system that requires the generosity of our overlords for us to get our crumbs. That's how I would look at it. CK writes, just give the vaccine to the IRS and send it with a stimulus check and done. Not exactly. I mean, there's some cooling stuff that happens, but it's a great point. Like somehow when it comes to getting money from people, we have this very sophisticated, generalized system that, does a better job than almost anything else, like in terms of tracking people. We could apply this sort of approach to all kinds of things if we had the will. Meanwhile, have the rest of the people get vaccinations at clinics. It's ridiculous how lay people can come up with ways to solve this, but the powers cannot. And it comes down to a lack of will.
Well, it's a lack of will, and the other thing is it's a brainwashing. I mean, so we've got the system, but we then also have the people underneath who've been formed by the system.
That's right.
And these two mutually reinforce each other over and over and over again, right? So if you said to Americans, okay, look, China has done a great job with this.
You can't believe anything that comes out of China because they're the evil communists.
Well, that would be the first thing that people would say.
Yeah.
Then the second thing is, if you said, okay, so what you have to do is we're going to, round everybody up and we're going to test everybody. They tested 11 million people in Wuhan in like a week. And what they did is, soldiers came to everybody's door and said, go down to the stadium and get tested. And everybody did that. And they tested everybody. Right. If you tried to do that in America, you'd have people showing up at the door with their guns shooting the soldiers, right? And you'd have all out war. And you'd have Rand Paul and all these lunatics in Congress just going, oh my God, this is, the libtard KKK commie rule and all of that. And so you have this formation in people who are against any kind of systemic cooperative functional activity. And so that allows the system to continue to fail, right? And to not be efficient, because anytime it tries to be efficient, everybody's just like, well, you're a commie, we're not going to do this. And so it, that's where a system works, is you've got the individuals kind of supporting it from underneath, and you've got the larger systems supporting it from above, and they're symbiotic, and they grow together and maintain this equilibrium together.
Well, and this is the crappy thing, like, and this sounds kind of harsh, but the reality is, if we want anything good to come of this, we have to leverage this crisis. Because the thing is, like, FDR didn't pass Social Security and stuff because he was being conciliatory with conservative elements. What there was enough pressure from people that they were afraid enough to where the compromise was with the people, right? And we have to create a situation where the government feels like they have to compromise with us rather than the rich, powerful people. And we're not doing that. Like, I see Biden making some gains. It's been good. But even NPR is calling this the third term of Barack Obama. So it's not like people are expecting anything new to come of this. And if there is something to be new to come of it, we have to like take advantage of this pandemic, which is a really calculated way of saying it. But there's a crisis point, and these kind of moments are ones where people can make gains and say, "Look, we demand a better healthcare system. Fuck you."
All right, last few comments. So we got
Karen writes, those companies that are giving away money to charity instead of buying Super Bowl commercials are probably getting tax breaks for those donations. That's also a factor.
Not probably, they are.
Yeah. And then just last comment will be from Gus. CK, even the current stimulus is a hot mess. We just got ours, and apparently a chunk of eligible folks, not all, don't get me started, are getting them in prepaid debit cards with 1 million penalty fees.
Yeah. So, like I said in the beginning, watching those dystopian future shows just aren't as fun anymore.
No.
But, oh well. So, all right. Well, thanks all. It's great being with you. Thanks for all the comments. And get online and try to get your vaccine. And
see what happens.
See what happens. All right.
See you next time.
Yeah.